Whoa. Hey, how's it going, YouTube? I am a completely random transgender person who happens to have a bachelor's degree in psychology. And today I wanted to talk to you guys about the current political discussion that's circulating around Facebook in regards to a whistleblowing event that is currently unrolling in the Supreme Court right now. There is a young woman by the name of Frances Haugen, who used to work for Facebook for about a decade and possibly even longer, and she was involved in interpreting what Facebook's content curation algorithms were doing to their audience and how effective those algorithms actually were. And she's currently testifying in the Supreme Court right now, stating that Facebook not only has known for a very, very long time that the way that these algorithms are functioning is detrimental to the psychological well-being of the audience that is receiving that information, but they're doing it on purpose, right? She said that not only have they done their own in-house research that has indicated that yes, these kinds of algorithms and the way in which it distributes information is directly harmful to the receptive audience of that media. Not only is that the case, but Facebook has known it for a very long time, and every single time they've been asked about that particular phenomenology, they've lied about the information that they have. They've said, no, it's not that big of a deal. It's really not that bad. When in reality, it's actually very detrimental to the well-being psychologically of a whole, basically a lot of people. And so what I wanted to talk to you guys about directly pertains to this particular issue and my own education, which is why I qualify myself as a completely random transgender person who just so happens to have a bachelor's degree in psychology. So what I would like to talk to you guys about is sort of an extension of Frances's assessment of what's going on in terms of the health outcomes that we are seeing currently from people who are chronic Facebook users, right? And so what she's stating essentially is that, like I said, there's sort of a negative psycho-phenomenology that's going on, the sort of cognitive behavioral processes of the people who spend a lot of time on Facebook are being very dramatically influenced by the content curation algorithms that Facebook is employing, which are being driven by a feature that Facebook has called the engagement-based rating system, right? And so what the engagement-based rating system is it's basically like a high score system, right? The more clicks, likes, dislikes, or comments that a particular piece of media gets, the higher the score, and then the higher the score, the more the algorithm disseminates it across the platform, right? And so why is this important, right? So when that's an entirely unregulated process, it's like sort of laissez-faire economics, right? The market itself will dictate what is important, right? And so with a decade's worth of research behind us now, we know that what's actually happening through this engagement-based rating system is that really, really incendiary, really, really provocative, really, really problematic media is catapulted to the top of that rating system and then disseminated, and it spreads like wildfire, and it's having a really, really negative impact on young people and probably just the entire planet. The American political process, democracy at large is wrapped up in this as well. There's a lot of very, very serious externalities to this kind of programming, and so it's currently entered the Supreme Court, and Miss Frances Haugen is asserting essentially that, one, Facebook was using this engagement-based rating system in order to spread out its information, which is fine, but Facebook also knew through its own in-house research that the way in which this algorithm was actually achieving that process was very negative, right? And it was having a profound negative psychological impact on the receptive audience. And And that's important because a lot of the people, well, first and foremost, it's extremely important because Facebook is a globally proliferated company, right? The whole planet is on Facebook. Your mom and dad and grandpa are on Facebook. Your little sister, your little brother is on Facebook. Your nieces and nephews, literally everybody's on Facebook. Except me, I got off 6 months ago, and it's precisely due to the things that are being discussed in this case, and I'll go into that later. But what she's saying is, not only are the algorithms engaging in this process in a negative manner that's detrimental to the psychological well-being of the audience, but Facebook knows this, has done copious amounts of research on this, and that research is very old research, and still, Facebook, when asked about these processes and how it's impacting its audience, has lied every single time about what it knows. That being said, Facebook knows very, very, very well that the algorithms that it's using to spread its information is literally sending hate speech to marginalized communities, or sending psychologically detrimental information to depressed people and children who are like developing in their minds, and it's having a very adverse effect on the development of young people. And I'll also go into that in a little while. But who am I? Like I said, or maybe I haven't said it because this is like my 4th or 5th take now, but I am just a random transgender person who has been on the internet in terms of video games and curating video game content, but we're not going to talk about that at all. In reality, I am also a psychologist. I graduated from Humboldt State University with a degree in psychology. I studied cognitive behavioral therapy, motivations to behavior, neurology, and endocrinology. The study of hormones and how hormones influence the body. Imagine a transgender person studying hormones. Crazy. Anyway, throughout my education, one of the things that I learned about that was really compelling to me and really interesting to me was telomeres. I'll go into a little bit of detail about what telomeres are right now because it's going to be important in a couple minutes, but essentially a telomere is on the end component of your DNA. And what is your DNA? If you're a young person that doesn't know, your DNA are the little tiny protein building blocks that exist within your cells that literally tell your cells how to build themselves. The DNA is kind of regarded in some circles as like the blueprints to life, right? And through the process of transcription, your body is always duplicating your DNA molecules, right? So DNA in its like neutral state is like wound up really, really tight around itself, and it's just in these little tiny, tiny little like compact little molecules, right? And when it's time to actually transcribe your DNA molecules, a few things happen. There's this process called RNA transcription, and a component of RNA transcription is this molecule called telomerase coming across your telomere and allowing that DNA strand to, from its wound up state, sort of unravel itself and stretch out so that it can be read by an RNA molecule, which will then sequence those proteins for duplication, right? And so it's like tight, wound up little coiled spring, and then whoo, spaghetti noodle, and then something just goes, scans it and copies it, right? And so functionally, at the ends of your DNA are these little caps, like on the ends of your shoelaces, the little plastic thing on the end of your shoelace, right? That helps it go through the eye hole of the little holes in your shoes as you're threading it through, right? You can think of your telomeres quite a lot like those. They're just protein molecules that exist on the end that say, hey, this is just where it stops, right? And they like those little end caps on the end of your shoelaces, they protect your DNA from fraying and unraveling, literally. And so science and a portion of my education tells us that there are certain things that can impact the health of your telomeres, right? And your telomeres are really, really important because once the telomeres have decayed, right, the telomeres serve as a preservative for the quality of your DNA strands, and your telomeres also ensure that during the process of duplicating, that transcription process that I just described, the DNA will be accurately transcribed, right? And so if you have shorter or weakened telomeres at the ends of your DNA, there's a higher likelihood of error during that duplication process. And that's important because those errors get manifested in your body biophysically as irregularities. And those irregularities can turn into things like cancer. And cancer is obviously not something that you really want to mess around with, right? So I want to take a quick break since we've talked about the telomeres and what's going on with telomeres, and just say that I kind of touched on this a little tiny bit, and I'm getting a little scrambled right now because I haven't been sleeping very well. I've got some stuff going on in my life right now that's pretty tough for me. Stress directly contributes to the health of your telomeres, and chronic stress has a very profound impact on human beings, right? So let's talk about what stress is, right? So we have our like endogenous stress levels, right? Our sort of homeostatic stress baseline, as we would call it in psychology. And so like when you get stressed, you can think of a stressor as like, you know, those carnival games where you have the hammer and you swing the hammer and it hits that little paddle, and the paddle like launches a metal slug up into the air, and you're trying to like ring a bell, right? And so like stress is like the hammer swinging and hitting that bell, and your body, you know, your sort of endogenous stress level is that weight that goes up, right? And if you like ring the bell, you have a full-blown panic attack, and it's not very good for you, right? Well, chronic stress is when you just keep swinging that hammer and you just don't stop, right? And biochemically and biophysically in your body, if you have an elevated level of stress for like a really long period of time, that weight will just, it won't get to the bottom anymore. Your body will just sort of get used to being stressed out, and then you'll have a new baseline, right? And so the distance between, you know, the baseline and ringing that bell is diminished, right? And this is a real thing that actually happens inside of everybody's body when you've been exposed to really, really chronic stress. That's why, you know, mental health is a big deal. That's why self-care is a really big deal. That's why taking breaks when you're stressed out is a really big deal, because you need to return to baseline in order for your body to be healthy. And so once you've achieved this elevated level of stress, if you're a person who's been exposed to chronic stressors, your telomeres are directly proportionally reduced in length based on your elevated level of stress and the duration of that prolonged exposure to those stressors. And so what I'm going to assert here is that the kind of negative content that's being curated by these algorithms at Facebook and being disseminated to all of us who interpret Facebook, the entire Facebook audience is impacted by this. Those kinds of things are real stressors, right? I myself, when I'm on Facebook, which I'm not anymore, I got off of Facebook about 6 months ago, but my Facebook timeline while I was on Facebook was quite a lot of stories to do with transgender people being hurt, right? Crimes against transgender people. I am a transgender person, and I'll just give you a brief description of what my morning looked like as I wake up and log into Facebook, right? Like that's how a lot of people use Facebook. And so I myself would wake up in the morning, pick up my phone, flip through a couple, you know, stories on Facebook and see what's going on. And because of the way that these algorithms function, the algorithm knows that I'm a transgender person because it's some information that has come up in one way or another. And so the algorithm just knows that that's going to be more engaging to me. It's going to be more likely to get me to click on it, right? And it wants it to be a compelling story so that I do click on it, because it drives revenue and it drives engagement, right? And it also sends feedback information to Facebook that, yes, this is the right kind of stuff to be sending to that kind of person, right? Because they're engaging with it, so therefore it's correct. It's what they want, right? And so as a transgender person, I'd wake up in the morning and it'd be, you know, a story about a transgender woman near me. I live near the Bay Area, like let's say in Oakland, getting murdered. And not only would it be a story about a transgender woman in Oakland getting murdered, but it would be like sensationalized and dramatized because the killer was motivated by a phenomenon known as like trans panic or like gay panic or whatever, which is where the murderer alleges that they were thrown into a psychotic rage because the transgender person lied about their identity and they were deceived. You know, this horrible, deceptive, lying, immoral transsexual people just trying to steal the virginity of these young heterosexual males or whatever, when in reality it's just a guy who saw a pretty girl who wanted to do what guys do when they see pretty girls, right? And it's just a different kind of pretty girl. But oftentimes, this transpanic narrative is used in the court of law after these kinds of crimes happen, and it's very effective in getting people off of like a second-degree murder sentence, which is like 25 years. So in my morning, I would be shown a story of a person just like me getting murdered in a very, very violent way for just simply being alive and existing, and then that story would culminate in, you know, the guy only got like 12 months or 18 months of community service, and he's actually just still on the street in Oakland. So that's not very good for me to interpret, and that kind of stresses me out, right? And for me, I was going to college when the whole like transgender bathroom narrative was happening, and that was like really tough for me to exist in too. And I'm not even going to go into detail about it at any kind of length, but I'll just say that it's now something that I understand that is a process of this engagement-based rating, right? That these Facebook algorithms are utilizing to dictate whether or not the media is correct for a specific kind of audience, right? And so, and that's also how I got introduced to content creators like Ben Shapiro and content creators like Steven Crowder or Gavin McInnes, which are all very extremist political commentators. They're definitely not real politicians, that are like radically right and venomously and adamantly anti-transgender. And I should probably lump George Peterson, whatever the frick his name is. Mr. Peterson, Professor Peterson, the lobster god. Y'all know him and love him, I'm sure. And so for me, my day-to-day interpretation of what's going on in the world is informed by those algorithms at Facebook telling me that the whole world wants to murder me, and when they finally do, they're not even going to get in trouble, and also, I'm not even allowed to go to the bathroom. I just got to hold it in for the rest of my life, and that's going to have to be okay with me. And so this case that's going on in the Supreme Court right now is really interesting. This Frances Haugen person is alleging that through these processes, the young minds of young women are being like inundated with images of like unattainable physical beauty, and it's causing some very profound psychological problems with these young people, right? And so I want to take a quick break to actually just like show you a segment of this trial as it's unrolling, where you're gonna hear a man's voice ask a kind of a vague and ridiculous question about how many people are being impacted by this kind of thing happening at Facebook, and she's gonna tell you a story about the tobacco industry, and I'll just let you go ahead and listen to that right now.
I also thought that the question of how do we assess the impact to the bottom line. We had a representative of Facebook in here recently who talked about that 8 out of 10 Facebook users feel their life is better, and their job is to get to 10 out of 10. Maybe this is the 20% that they're missing. I don't know how large that the demographic is of people that are caught back up into this circuitous,
So what he just said is that 80% of the people who are using Facebook, which could be a completely fabricated number by Facebook, by the way, attest that Facebook on average improves their life. But 20% say that it has been a detriment to their well-being.
Sense of really taking them down into the wrong direction. How many people that is? Do you have any idea?
That quote last week was really shocking to me because I don't know if you're aware of this, but in the case of cigarettes, only about 10% of people who smoke ever get lung cancer, right? So the idea that 20% of your users could be facing serious mental health issues and that's not a problem is shocking. I also want to emphasize for people that eating disorders are serious, right? There are going to be women walking around this planet in 60 years with brittle bones because of choices that Facebook made around emphasizing profit today. Or there are going to be women when they're in 20 years who want to have babies who can't because they're infertile as a result of eating disorders today. They're serious. And I think there's an opportunity here for having public oversight and public involvement, especially in matters that impact children.
Right. Well,
And so her response to that is that with the tobacco industry, we know that out of all the people that consume tobacco products, only about 10% of those tobacco consumers are ever going to actually develop cancer throughout their lifetime, which is still horrible. It's really bad. Cancer's awful. And it's literally only 10% of those consumers that are ever going to experience that problem. And yet look at the degree at which we regulate the tobacco industry. It's extraordinary. And so we know that 20% of the people who consume social media platforms like Facebook chronically, 20% of those people are going to develop very serious psychological illnesses. So if only 10% of the people who consume tobacco develop cancer, and that's enough of that particular demographic to cause pervasive industry defining legislation, right? Tobacco products have to be marketed in a very specific way. They can't be advertised to children. They really can't even be printed in printed media anymore. You don't really see a whole lot of it on the internet. And then even down to the packaging and what's actually allowed on the actual cigarette box itself has been dictated by the law as well. In the meantime, twice as many people, probably a lot more than twice as many people, but proportionally double that percentage of the people who engage with Facebook have profound mental illnesses because of Facebook, right? And it's entirely unregulated at this point still. So it's a big deal, right? And so now I want to make the link to how the telomeres come into play here, right? So as I stated, your telomeres are directly impacted by your endogenous levels of stress, like your baseline stress level dictates the length and the quality of your telomeres, and your telomeres dictate the quality of the transcription of your DNA, and your DNA builds your body. If you have bad DNA, you have cancer. If you have good DNA, you don't, right? So and there could even be an argument that's made in regards to how identity development happens, cognitively in a young person's mind, and how profoundly something like Facebook is going to interact with that. But that'd be a whole master's class. So what I want to say is there's a couple of psychological studies that have been done on sort of your mental health and how it impacts your telomere length directly. One of these studies is called Telomeres and Stress, Promising Avenues for Research in Psycho-Oncology. Psycho-Oncology being the study of cancer that is resultant from your psychology, right? So the way that you think can give you cancer, and it's through your telomeres that phenomena actually occurs. You have an elevated level of stress. This is the study that says that, and it was conducted by a woman named Eleanor Law, who is a PhD scientist in the field of psychology. And to make a long story short, she says that if you are exposed to chronic stress, you have an elevated level of baseline stress, and that leads to shortened telomere length definitively and conclusively. And the shorter your telomeres, the more likely you are to develop cancer, and it's through that mechanism of DNA transcription and errors arising from that. Those errors are retained with every subsequent copy, and then more errors get injected in, and those errors are also retained and then duplicated more times until you have cancer all over your whole body and get very, very sick. And then there was another interesting study that was conducted by a woman named Alyssa Epple, and Miss Epple, her study is called Can Childhood Adversity Affect Telomeres of the Next Generation? Possible Mechanisms and Implications, and next generation research. And so what her study looks into is how profound stress on a parent, particularly a mother, will be actually genetically transcribed to their offspring, right? So a parent who had an incredibly stressful life measured through what they call adverse childhood experiences, aka ACEs, the higher number of ACEs the mother has, the shorter telomere length the child will have. So my assertion, my contribution to this discourse that we're having right now in regards to how Facebook is impacting the psychological well-being and the physical well-being of a global population is simply this. The kinds of media that is curated by these engagement-based ratings that Facebook uses to disseminate its media to its audience, if it is curating stressful and psychologically detrimental media for you to consume as an audience member, and you're being exposed to that on a regular basis, morning, noon, night, day to day to day to day, for the entire life cycle of Facebook. In my case, I was on Facebook since it was invented. As soon as it became publicly available to high school kids, I was on it. I was a sophomore in high school. You know, that was 17 years ago. It's been a long time. And I've been on it the whole time, like every single day, right? So what my assertion and my addition to this particular conversation would be is that sending out this kind of media to young people is elevating their baseline stress level. This is a form of stress. This is like almost like a psychological attack on a global population, and Facebook has known that its algorithms are curating media in this way and sending it out to anybody, really. Depressed people are getting more sad stories in their timelines. Young girls who have body image issues already are getting stories that contain thin-spiration. Really hot fitness models are going to young chubby girls' timelines, and it's hurting their brains, and I'm one of those people as well, unfortunately. And then the transgender people are getting inundated with Gavin McInnes and Steven Crowder and Ben Shapiro. And then conversely, those kinds of people are being elevated in society to literally celebrity status, and it's a result of a sort of a runaway train of algorithmic misinformation, right? And so what I would like to state is that directly, Facebook is knowingly elevating on a global level, on a global scale, is directly impacting the baseline stress level of an entire global population in such a way that in 20, 30 years' time, after Facebook has been invented, so about 10 years from now to 20 years from now, you're going to see an enormous increase in cancer rates across the globe from people who spent a lot of time on Facebook through this mechanism. The stories that are curated for us are driving us to become more stressed out and more fearful people, and it's elevating our baseline level of stress in such a way that over time, being exposed to this kind of media is going to shorten our telomere length, and it's going to cause issues with our DNA transcription until we cultivate cancer within our bodies, and we will suffer from dramatically higher rates of cancer across our entire global population. And not only does Facebook already know this, but science and psychology at large already knows this, and by extension of that, we are also currently discovering right now today, this study was done in 2020, we're discovering today that not only are we elevating our own baseline stress and giving ourselves cancer through consuming these kinds of media, but we're passing it on to our kids. We're doing this to our kids, and then our kids are going to pass this on to their kids. This is a really, really big deal. There's a good chance that this is going to be the most important news media story in the next decade of our lives. This is on the order of like yellow journalism and William Randolph Hearst. This is this is an enormously pervasive and global issue. It's something that you deserve to educate yourself on, and I highly recommend that you guys seek out some information in regards to psychological well-being and how it impacts the duplication and replication of your own DNA and the kinds of very real physiological outcomes